Welcome to God Pods, faith conversations from Boston College's Church in the 21st Century Center.
Welcome to God Pods. I'm Elise Italiano-Urenic, Associate Director for the Church in the 21st Century Center at Boston College. Ignatian spirituality offers us a vision that we can find God in all things. In these episodes, we're going to explore different spiritual and biblical themes which come up during Lent, including the practices of prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. In this first episode, we're going to look at how praying the Rosary can add new life to your Lenten journey. Our guest today is Gretchen Crow. Gretchen is the editor-in-chief of our Sunday Visitor Newsweekly, which is the only weekly Catholic newspaper in the United States. In 2017, Gretchen wrote her first book, Why the Rosary, Why Now?, published by our Sunday Visitor. Her second book, available this October, is a devotional called Praying the Rosary with St. John Paul II. If anyone can speak to the power of praying the Rosary this Lent, it's our guest today. Gretchen, welcome to God Pods.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're happy to have you here. So Gretchen, there are quite a few books written on the subject of the Rosary. I did one quick Google search and had hundreds of results. I couldn't stop scrolling. Why did you want to write a book on the topic, and why was now the right time to bring the subject up again?
Well, that's a great question, Elise. And I think we have to start by looking at the reality of today's world, especially for people of faith. I think that you and I both know that people of faith are facing a lot in today's world. You know, we've got growing secularism. We've got kind of the breakdown of family life. And of course, there's always the geopolitical problems, the war, violence. And on top of that, we have a sense of being distracted all of the time because we all have these things called devices now, which are so omnipresent. And those result in a loss of understanding of proper relationship. But I think we're facing a lot of challenges. But as people of faith, we also know that the answer to these challenges is a strong, permanent relationship with Jesus Christ. And so when you think about that being the goal, and you think, okay, how do I get there? You say, okay, we as Catholics are blessed to have Mary as our model, as the first disciple of Jesus Christ. And in that modeling, Mary points us to her son, who she loves more than anything. You know, there are many ways to get to Jesus. We're blessed to have, as Catholics, frequent access to Jesus present in the Eucharist. But Mary, as the first disciple, as the one who loves her son the most, has this intimate connection with Jesus and the ability to lead us directly to him. And the Rosary is that most powerful of powerful tools that allows us to ponder the mysteries of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection through the eyes of Mary. And she helps us then grow closer to him through her. And so, when we think about all of the challenges in our world today, and we know that the solution to these challenges is a better relationship with Jesus Christ, then it only makes sense then to look to Mary, who can guide us directly to Jesus. And that's what she does through the Rosary. And, we need the Rosary right now because we need Jesus right now.
You're right. It's a perennial need, and you describe that so wonderfully. I'm going to transition then to kind of follow up with that to say, we need it right now in our contemporary society, but we also need it now during Lent. Lent is a time in which we're encouraged to really take a good look at our relationship with God, with Jesus, as you say. How does praying to Mary specifically help us during Lent if we're supposed to focus on her son?
Sure. Well, I think praying to Jesus through Mary is an excellent way to spend your Lent. Particularly through the Rosary, we can meditate during Lent on the sorrowful mysteries, those moments during Christ's passion and death where we can recognize and enter into the reality of the depth of Christ's love for us and the sacrifice that he made for us. Just by going through those mysteries, we can better understand through the eyes of Mary just what it is that Jesus did for us. And if that doesn't help us grow closer to him during Lent, I really don't know what will. that prepares us in a very real way for Holy Week. And it prepares us even more importantly for the resurrection and for Easter, so that we know, we better understand the sacrifice that Jesus made for us, and we can better live our lives accordingly. And that's what it's all about. It's understanding the salvation that is available through Jesus, and then taking that understanding and modeling our lives and our actions on that. And so if we spend Lent kind of thinking about those moments of Christ's passion and death, those moments where Mary says, look at my son, look at my beloved son, look at what he has done for us, look at what he has done for you, that's incredibly, incredibly powerful. And during Lent, we have these 40 days where, we can do that. It doesn't take a whole lot of time to pray the Rosary. I know it can seem intimidating, but it takes 20 minutes a day. That's shorter than a sitcom. It's shorter than the news. It's shorter than most podcasts. All you need to do is just make time during your commute, or make time at the end of the day or at the beginning of the day, wherever it fits better with your schedule, and just connect with Jesus through Mary. And I think, if we were to do that every day during Lent, by the time we arrive at Holy Week, after particularly meditating on those sorrowful mysteries, it will have a lot more meaning to our lives, and Easter will be a lot more fruitful for us.
That's really encouraging look at this. Gretchen, you're a working mother. You mentioned some sort of pockets of the day where people might find time. And you also make the claim in the book that it's not necessarily the way you do it. It's that consistency in praying the Rosary is really essential. So a regular practice of it. Why is that so important? And how have you found time to pray it consistently, especially with your vocational responsibilities and with your role as editor-in-chief at Our Sunday Visitor?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I'm very, very fortunate to, and I know not all of us are, but I'm very, very fortunate to work for a Catholic apostolate. So, there's an opportunity for daily Mass and for regular prayer. So that it does make it easier for me. Not to mention I have a kind of a 20-minute commute directly to work and back from work. So it's just the perfect amount of time there. And I realize not everybody has these kind of luxuries. But I think it's important for us to remember that each of us can have the temptation of getting caught up in life and work and in our family. And it's hard sometimes to commit to regular prayer. But I will also say that, I will say that, there are times if my prayer life drops off, if I am inconsistent in praying the Rosary, I always notice. There's always something that's off. There's a disharmony. There's a disunity. There are problems in relationships. There are problems in, just a lack of peace or a grounding in a relationship with Jesus Christ. So I think once you become kind of a consistent, regular prayer of the Rosary, you see the benefits that it has in your interior life, and that's something that not only, do you not let go, you don't want to let go of, because you can see the fruits are so visible in one's interior spirituality. And so we're all busy. I totally understand. I have a busy job. I have a family. I have a young child. And I think the more ways that we can find to incorporate family prayer, incorporate the Rosary into our lives kind of naturally, the better. So, don't feel like you have to do it alone. Ask your spouse to pray the Rosary with you. If you're praying the Rosary as a family, and you don't have a whole lot of time, you can start just by praying a decade. That's okay too. I think it's just about the consistency. It's about the building of a relationship. And once that relationship, kind of the seed begins to blossom from that relationship, it's something that you don't want to let go of. And so you will naturally just keep on moving forward with.
Well, I'm personally encouraged by that, and I can testify to the fact that, when you get busy with work and other responsibilities, sometimes the first thing to go is your quiet time, your silence, your stillness, and of course your prayer and relationship with God. And so that's encouraging to know it's just a small pocket of time and is really bears great fruit. So thanks for sharing that with our listeners. I think it would be great to pivot to the actual content of the book. I found it really interesting, especially the way you laid it out. It's in part personal reflection and in part those reflections being in dialogue with other members of the church throughout kind of all of history who have, or throughout our tradition, who have a relationship or experience with the Rosary or something to say about it. So your book is made up of these commentaries and your reflections, and some of those people include popes who are now saints, like John the 23rd, John Paul II. You have Saint Therese, who talks about her devotion, and Father Patrick Peyton, who coined the very famous maxim, "The family that prays together stays together." How did you go about selecting the commentators who you would sort of be in dialogue with?
Sure. Well, a lot of prayer, first of all. So I wanted to really kind of discern the chapters that I was going to include. I think that was really important because I didn't just want to be putting things in the book from anyone who had ever said anything about the Rosary, because we know that many people have over a great tradition of faith. So I wanted to try to identify the passages from certain individuals who were either deeply affected up by the Rosary in their lives, or who could really speak to the issues that we're facing today. So some of the things that we talked about at the beginning are struggles with secularism, or struggles with the breakdown of the family, for an increase in discipleship, etc. I really wanted to make this book as relevant as possible to today, so that if people were looking for a compelling reason why to start praying the Rosary, they would have one. They would have one in these arguments within the book. So when it came to choosing the text for this book, of course, I was faced with not the challenge of how to fill the book up, like, what do I put in this book? It was, of course, how to whittle it down and how to really discern what was going to make the most impact for the reader. So I wanted to find those compelling stories. I wanted to find those strong arguments to help make the case, really, that people should pray the Rosary more frequently. And so I think it ended up, I'm hopeful that it ended up with a good mix of individuals speaking from their own personal experience, but also speaking from a deep faith and spirituality and love of the Rosary, to kind of encourage whoever picks up this book that it's the fruits and the benefits of praying the Rosary far outweigh whatever challenges may come with it.
That's great. I found it really moving to realize that by praying the Rosary, I was connected to so many Catholics, not only throughout history, but also across the globe. It's a global practice. You can find, I know my father went on a pilgrimage to Fatima and Lourdes with my mother, and he was so struck by so many men in these religious squares and city squares praying the Rosary. He was so moved. So like you said, there's so many people throughout the history of our faith who have prayed this devotion and experienced its fruits, but also all over the world. Is there anyone you would add as an addendum now that you've written the book?
Well, I think within our country, it would be kind of really interesting to have the experience of like one of our new blesseds here. So we have, Blessed Father Stanley Rother out of Oklahoma, and we have Blessed Solanus Casey. Solanus Casey was a great devotee of the Rosary, and he would frequently pray it for all the many intentions that would come to him through people from throughout the country and the world. So I think that would be a really interesting addition.
I think Father Solanus would be great. I also think of Pope Francis, who talks sort of unrelentingly about the Blessed Mother and his relationship with her. And in fact, he's encouraged us throughout his papacy to pray the Rosary for an end to war and suffering. I know he highlighted Syria. Like you said, if you look at the geopolitical situation, Mary has made promises in her apparitions that praying the Rosary would be beneficial, fruitful in enacting peace in our world. What would you say to critics who would say, yeah, right, I mean, how could this prayer fix these massive problems? We're still encouraged to do that today. What might you say to them after writing this book?
Sure. Well, I love how you bring up Mary at Fatima, because I would direct them right to that. I would say, look, our Blessed Mother appeared to three shepherd children in Fatima in 1917, and she told us, pray the Rosary for peace in the world. We know that the problems of the world are born of the sin of our own humanity. So the choice really, that means, lies with us, right? We have the choice to listen to Mary, to listen to her son. Mary's telling us, pray the Rosary, develop a relationship with my son, love my son the way that I loved him. Or our choice is to continue to give into sin and to continue to tear one another apart in our very polarized world. And certainly we see that not only, in our country and in our world, but in our church. We have the choice. We have the tools, and the Rosary is one of those most important tools to help us make the right choices that lead to peace and unity, rather than the choices that lead to greater upheaval and greater polarization. And the choice is ours, and we just have to make it. So if people are going to be skeptical about the Rosary, again, I would turn them directly to her and say, look, she was here. This is what she said. All we need to do is listen to her.
That's great, Gretchen. We'll go back to the book for a second. You have so many stories. I mean, so many people credit the Rosary or the intercession of Mary through the Rosary with miraculous healings or interventions. We know that she, in our tradition, there have been apparitions where the Rosary has been involved. You share one story in the book about 4 Jesuit priests who credit praying the Rosary with saving their life, and they mince no words about it. They have a direct link between praying the Rosary, save their life. Boston College is a Catholic and Jesuit university. This story is really pertinent for our listeners in our tradition. Could you tell the listeners a little bit more about that story, and relatedly, what impact reading that story had on your own faith life?
Sure. Oh, this is just an incredible story about the power of praying the Rosary. It's recounted by a Jesuit priest, as you mentioned, Father Hubert Schiffer, who was praying the Rosary with 3 other Jesuit priests when the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945. And the church where they were, and I have to add, it was dedicated to the Assumption of Our Lady. The church where they were praying the Rosary was only 8 blocks from the epicenter where the atomic bomb was dropped. We're talking about an action that wiped out, an entire city. And here are these 4 priests praying together 8 blocks from the epicenter. And they spent the day, and he recounts it in this writing that I include in the book, which is incredibly powerful. The priests spent the day surrounded by fire. They spent the day surrounded by smoke until a rescue team could get to them. Yet all 4 of them survived. And even more incredibly, all 4 of them, none of them suffered any long-term effects from radiation from the bomb. And I think what really, you asked what kind of impact it had on me. Well, as I was reading this story, there's a line that Father Schiffer wrote, and he said, prayer is more powerful than the atom bomb. Mm-hmm. And I had to say that sentence stopped me in my tracks the first time that I read it. And it continues. Every time I pick up the book and flip through it and see that sentence, I again am stopped in my tracks. It's incredible. Prayer is more powerful than the atom bomb. And I think, certainly that was literally the case in this miraculous event. But I think that's also a really, really important thing for us to remember in our daily lives. When we have the option of praying or perhaps doing something else, or growing in our prayer lives, always say yes, because prayer is one of the most powerful things out there, and the Rosary is one of the most powerful tools that can lead us through prayer to Jesus Christ. And I think I just think that's so true, and that's what this anecdote, this miraculous story from Hiroshima really tells us.
I think the recovery of that story and sort of the spreading of that story, again, I feel like I'm fairly well read in matters of the faith, but that was the first time I had heard it. But sharing that more widely would be so important, especially as we look at, again, the current geopolitical situation, potential nuclear arms race uptick, post 9/11 world, we're always on our edge, but that prayer is more powerful than that. The atom bomb, literally, that is really just a remarkable thing to behold and kind of live by. It makes me think of a story, the book that was captured in Left to Tell, where Immaculée Ilibagiza was a young woman who survived the Rwandan genocide. She survived, I think it was 3 months, locked in a bathroom with several other women, and she credits praying the Rosary all day, every day for those 3 months with, the Lord sparing her life. Are you familiar with that story too?
I'm not. There's so many of those stories. You can go throughout history and identify moments where people have said, "I relied on the Rosary, and this is how it benefited my life," or "This is how it saved me." I mean, there's another story that I include in the book by Father Patrick Peyton, who is the known as the Rosary priest, and he also, as you mentioned, kind of coined that phrase, "The family that prays together stays together." But Father Peyton recounts his own miraculous recovery when he was in seminary. He was very, very ill. The doctors had done everything that they could for him. They thought that he was just going to die. And he said, "No, I'm gonna pray to the Blessed Mother, and she's gonna save me." And lo and behold, he prayed to the Blessed Mother, and she saved him. And he said, "Well, you saved me, so I'm spending the rest of my life dedicated to you." And that's why he's known as the Rosary priest, and spent the rest of his life traveling the world promoting the graces of the fruits that come from the Rosary. And so these stories, like the one that you tell, the story of Father Peyton, the story of Father Schiffer, and the other Jesuit priests, these are just a tiny, tiny example of the many, many anecdotes and stories that people have to tell the power of the Rosary. It's really, really incredible.
That's great. I love those stories. One criticism, I have several friends and family members who are not Catholic, they're Christian. And you addressed one of the common criticisms, which is, if you want to pray to God, why do you sort of ask the intercession of his mother? And you addressed, as the primary disciple and the mother of Jesus, no one knows him better. And we have a biblical tradition in which, a mother in the Jewish tradition would advocate, to the king. The mother would be the queen. And so we know that with Mary. But another common criticism is this really a prayer born from the heart if you are sort of repeatedly saying phrases over and over again that are sort of handed to you? What might you say? I mean, in your book, you kind of explore that the repetition is really, really important in the practice and can lead us kind of to a stillness or quietude where we enter into that. And we're also, maybe you could talk about the value of that as a type of real personal prayer.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that the repetition of the Rosary, we need stillness and we need quietness to be able to achieve it. But also the roteness of the Rosary helps us to just get to that silence, to get to that quiet. We're so distracted these days, as we've talked about. We're feeling more disconnected than ever. We struggle with the usual demands of life to make it hard to slow down. We don't even have downtime anymore. It doesn't exist. We spend it scrolling through some type of feed. And I'm just as guilty as I think all of us. We've got supercomputers in our pockets and in our purses that seem to attract us like magnets, unfortunately, and we don't allow ourselves to quiet down. So the Rosary can be a great, great tool to help us kind of break through that noise, to help us recover in our lives this stillness and this silence that we need. We really, really need, not only to develop in a relationship with Mary and with Jesus Christ. We need quiet, we need stillness, but we need it to function. Like we need moments where we can reflect and self-reflect and self-assess and think about our priorities and remember, be intentional about how we're spending our time. So I think that the Rosary, through its repetitive prayers, through the meditations on the mysteries, it kind of demands that we find a silence, that we make time for, to put down our devices, to slow our minds, and to concentrate on the Lord. And with that comes a great, great interior peace. And again, I think, as I kind of said at the beginning, once we find it, once we get a taste of it, it's like those great conversion stories. Once people get a taste of Jesus Christ, and the great power that he can bring to our lives and the great change that he can affect. It's really, really difficult to turn away from that. And I think the Rosary is the same way. I think once we get a sense of the great fruits and the great benefits that come from praying to Jesus through Mary, it's really hard to turn your back on that.
You're right. It helps with stillness and silence, and it requires, like you said, us kind of creating an atmosphere, maybe putting down our phones, stepping away in order to do that. One practice that St. Ignatius offers us is like the engagement of the imagination in prayer. And so for me, the Rosary is a way to kind of enter into the scenes of the Bible and the life of Christ, to put yourself there. And so the Rosary can really help you in that way, kind of walk with Jesus, especially, like you said, with the sorrowful mysteries during Lent, to be right there, comforting him. He's close to those who suffer, especially Lent is a great time to meditate on that. So you're absolutely right about the need to create that space and its benefits, spiritually first and foremost, and also other ways.
Yes, I absolutely. And I think I also just want to mention the approach of St. Louis de Montfort, who has really made a great difference in my life. He encourages a meditation on the fruits of each mystery while praying each decade of the Rosary. So, absolutely, it's important to think about the mystery and reflect on the mystery as you pray. Of course, say the prayers, but by allowing us to reflect on a way to grow in virtue in our own lives, it kind of even makes the Rosary more personal, if that makes sense. So, say you're praying the mystery, the joyful mystery, the first joyful mystery of the Annunciation. Well, the spiritual fruit that relates to that is humility. So, as you're kind of praying the mystery and reflecting on Mary's own humility at the moment where she said yes to something that she had absolutely no clue what she was really getting herself into, but trusted in the Lord and showed an incredible humility, then we're able to just, as we pray that decade, ask the Lord for the grace to develop greater humility in our own lives. And I think that's another wonderful way to pray the Rosary, especially during a time like Lent, where, we want to be growing in virtue. We want to be growing in holiness. And in doing so, we need to be able to ask the Lord for his assistance, and also be able to have that time to self-reflect on the ways that maybe we're not living lives of humility or whatever virtue it may be, patience, what have you. But this is, by meditating on these mysteries and by incorporating spiritual fruit into those mysteries, it really kind of helps us grow in our own spiritual and interior lives, which I think is a great practice for Lent.
Thanks for that reflection. I think you're absolutely right. I know our listeners will certainly take comfort in that, especially during this season. Just a few final questions for you. I often think about associations my cousins or family members have, the Rosary with kind of, older ladies after daily Mass kind of squeezing in a devotion. And I've been that, only young person after daily Mass wondering, am I okay? Are you seeing a renewed interest in young people in this devotion? There's so many offerings, I think, in sort of pop culture or sort of, well-intentioned ideas about, sort of general meditation and slowing down. And I think these are all kind of, they kind of get at what the Christian tradition offers, especially with the Rosary. But are you seeing young people embrace it, or is it really for a more mature, older crowd?
No, I think young people are praying the Rosary, and I think I would really credit that quite a bit to our recent popes. I mean, I know St. John Paul II had that. We had the year of the Rosary back at the beginning of the 21st century, and he had a tremendous love for the Rosary and wrote quite a bit about it and spoke quite a bit about it, all the way through Pope Benedict, and of course, as you mentioned, Pope Francis, who has a deep love of the Rosary, has a deep, deep devotion to the Blessed Mother. And when you have these examples of our Holy Fathers, it makes it a lot more palatable for young people to want to pray the Rosary more. So I think that we have seen a resurgence in praying the Rosary probably in the last 20 years or so, and these even include by Catholics who maybe even once took it for granted but have since rediscovered it. And I would put myself in that own category. You know, I'm a cradle Catholic. I always loved Mary. I always loved the Rosary. But you know, you also kind of you have the option of taking it for granted and just saying, well, the Rosary's always there, Mary's always there. But you really have to be intentional about praying it, spending the time with her and with Jesus, and making sure that you know the prayers, making sure that you are committed to it. And so that's not always easy. So I do think that that there is a resurgence in it, but I think it can always be stronger. And I think, you know, we're also faced with more people who are not religious these days, who identify as nuns, who don't have that connection. So I think that the more that we can kind of help them realize the great benefits of the Rosary, the more we can kind of draw them back into relationship with Jesus Christ. So yes and no. Yes, I do see a resurgence, but we also have a great hill to walk up, if that makes sense.
Well, it seems like a good opportunity to me. The last question I'll ask is about kind of handing on the faith through the Rosary. So at the C21 Center here at Boston College, one of the pillars that we try to tackle is how to hand on the faith in today's culture. As you mentioned, we have an increase of nuns, those who are religiously unaffiliated, particularly of a millennial demographic. And you cite some studies by the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate from Georgetown University that were kind of bleak about the role of Catholic families. For instance, 22% of Catholic families attend Mass on Sundays. 68% of Catholic parents have not enrolled their children in religious education. But on a hopeful note, you say still that the family is still the primary place where children can receive the faith, where, you know, the family hands on the faith in a lot of ways. What case would you make to young parents, you know, like yourself, to start the practice of the Rosary as a way to hand on, you know, the teachings of the faith, the relationship with Jesus? What case would you make for them to start now if they haven't done that with their children?
Oh, I think that helping your children with a relationship with Mary and with the Rosary can't start too soon. I wrote and compiled this book while I was pregnant with my first child. The book was published on the day he was born. So I feel a very strong connection and understanding of the need to introduce my son throughout his short life to the Blessed Mother. And so we do that just by praying the prayers, by making things available. You know, he's got a plastic rosary. When he was a little, he had a teething rosary that he would just chew on. But, you know, it's just becoming familiar. It's becoming, it's understanding that these are part of the normal routine of daily life. You know, he's almost 21 months old, and he knows all of the rosary prayers by heart. And he carries around his little plastic rosary. You know, I'm not saying he understands the whole picture, you know, but because my husband and I pray the Hail Mary, because we pray the prayers of the Rosary with him, he has just, you know, he's gotten them, you know, he just knows them. He can fill in all the gaps when we say the prayers. It's never too early to start. There is nothing more essential to strong family life than consistent, meaningful prayer together. That is the crust. And like you said, the parents are the first and the best teachers of the faith, and that starts in the home. And it starts with, you know, with consistency. It starts with regularity. It starts with an openness to prayer. It starts with having items around the house, statues and tactile things like prayer cards that can help them connect with the faith. And you know, there's nothing really more tactile than the Rosary. And parents can best lead their children to a life of prayer by modeling it themselves. And so if we do our job as parents, then our kids will kind of just naturally realize that this is a regular and normal and expected part of daily life. And I think we'll grow up with that. That's my prayer anyway. That's my prayer every day. I'm new to this parenting thing still, but it's been incredible to see how our example of prayer and family prayer has really rubbed off on our son.
Well, I'm sure once he's talking, we'll be able to hear more about that. It's wonderful to hear. You mentioned a teething rosary, a plastic rosary. There are rosaries made of precious metals, ones that smell like roses. But at the end of the day, I think you might agree with me that you really only need 10 fingers and a little bit of space and time to be able to pray it. Gretchen,
that's all you need.
Yeah, that's all you need. Gretchen, where can people, our listeners, find your books? I know the second one won't be out for this Lent. They can probably use it during Advent, but let us know where we can find them.
Sure. So, Why the Rosary, Why Now can be found on the website of Our Sunday Visitor, and that is osvcatholicbookstore.com. So that's OSV, like Our Sunday Visitor, catholicbookstore.com. It can also be found on Amazon. You can get it there in print, or it's available in ebook format, and it's also available as an audiobook on audible.com.
Oh, wonderful. Are you the one who recorded it?
No, thankfully I'm not.
Okay, well, maybe for the next one, maybe we can have you on it. Gretchen, on behalf of the Church in the 21st Century Center here at Boston College, we wish you and your family a wonderful Lent with Mary through the Rosary.
Thank you so much, Elise.
For more Catholic faith resources, follow us at bc.edu/C21 or via Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.